Hello there, this is James S. Crawford, the year is 1978, and after a couple of years of barely even noticing that the ghost of Watcher Azazel was still haunting me at all, because the fact that no horror films genuinely excited him meant that he was basically just going through the motions, this year, the 40th anniversary of the movie Halloween has caused him to go full poltergeist.
Chipper, what is this?
It's a Category 10.
And having almost immediately realised that there was no other way to appease him,
Hurry! Read through your dumb book already!
I'm looking, and it's not dumb, okay? This book is gonna save our lives. Alright, here we go. Advice. Oh, seriously?
I swore a blood oath vowing upon my eternal soul to watch every single movie in the Halloween franchise, including the 40th anniversary cash-in, which I'll review in a separate video. But before I go on to review each of the other 10 Halloween movies in turn, I first need to address 3 important points regarding the franchise as a whole. First of all, the fact that Halloween 1978 is the grandmother of what we all recognise today as the quintessential American slasher movie, the first of the unholy triumvirate, followed by Friday the 13th Part 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street, to feature a superhuman or inhuman monster rather than merely a mentally ill, traumatised or otherwise deranged killer, and which would inadvertently lead to the rise and ubiquity of the truism that being a teenager who has sex in such movies is what inevitably gets them killed, a fallacy which I'll go on to debunk in due course. As a matter of fact, although from what I can gather there is apparently a raging debate in the horror movie community over which was the first true slasher film, the mummy genre with its unstoppable pursuer, Peeping Tom 1960, which was the first movie to show a murder from the killer's point of view, Psycho with its infamous shower scene, or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in which teenagers were brutally slaughtered simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, such a debate is like arguing over whether caves, huts, cabins, or teepees were the first true two-story detached homes, because while each of those films contained what was to become a defining aspect of the slasher genre as exemplified by Halloween, bread, tomatoes, and cheese are each the fundamental aspects of pizza, but no one argues about which of those foods were the first of the pizza genre. Indeed, while the only film on the list of contenders for the title of first true slasher film before Halloween which actually has a young woman face off against the killer and a few other recognisable aspects of slashers during the final half hour, including the brutal stabbing of Lois Lane with a glass unicorn, is Black Christmas 1974, or as I prefer to call it, Check the Attic, you fucking morons. That only makes Black Christmas a slasher in the same way that the final half hour of Raging Bull makes that film the first part of Martin Scorsese's Rags to Riches to Rags gangster trilogy, along with Goodfellas and Casino. Seriously, watch all 3 of those movies in any order you choose and then attempt to tell me with a straight face that Raging Bull wasn't merely the proof of concept for the later films. In fact, to demonstrate just how futile and pointless this entire non-debate truly is, the film that I couldn't stop thinking about when I first watched the original Halloween was Jaws, because beyond the obvious differences, in each case, the townspeople were being stalked by a mostly unseen, or at the very least ignored predator, and no different from Laurie Strode in Halloween, only Martin Brody seemed to be aware of the danger, always on the alert and noticing what others ignored. And similarly, no different from Dr. Sam Loomis in Halloween, Martin Brody was struggling to warn the authorities who inevitably dismissed him as a crank. So indeed, just like the original Halloween, Jaws was a masterclass in creating isolation in a crowd, of creating the horror movie tension of the protagonist being alone psychologically rather than physically, until the second half of Jaws, that is, which was basically just Moby Dick, and that I regard as effectively being an entirely separate movie. On top of which, as I indicated earlier, the fact that both Michael Myers and the Shark are presented as monsters beyond the limit of human experience and understanding, not as natural or relatable beings, is what makes them terrifying in a way that not even Leatherface could ever have been. So considering that we can even add Jaws to the list of potential contenders if we continue searching for the original instead of simply accepting that creativity is a process, that every giant stands on the shoulders of giants, and that just as countless innovations, inventions, and visions came together to create the moon landing, for example, countless innovations, inventions, and visions came together to create Halloween, the only valid response to the question posed in Scream 4 is that there is no single correct answer. Because remember, the entire point of the killer asking that question in the movie in the first place was that no matter what answer she gave, he could have simply declared another film to have been the first slasher movie for any reason, she would have been equally wrong, and the killer's victim would have been equally dead.
Name the movie that started the slasher craze. Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, or Psycho?
Psycho!
None of the above. Peeping Tom, 1960, directed by Michael Powell. First movie to ever put the audience in the killer's POV.
So then, having hopefully and finally accepted that either Halloween was the first original, true, and whatever else we want to call it, modern American slasher film, or no movie was, so shut the fuck up, the second point that I need to address is that no, having sex is not the reason why Michael butchered people, that no, being a quote-unquote virgin is not the reason why Laurie Strode survived, and my evidence for these bold assertions is, watching the films. But thanks to the overlap between our grossly misogynistic culture still condemning any expression of female sexuality as a sin to be punished, and our instinctive need to concoct a reason why bad things happen, with even victims of rape and other assaults blaming themselves, because if we can tell ourselves that we understand why it happened, then we can convince ourselves that we still have control and can avoid it in the future, as the movie The Cabin in the Woods pointed out with all of the elegance and subtlety of a brick to the face, the entire American slasher movie industry is based around the trope that the virgin usually lives and the whore tends to die first, when on the contrary, the entire point of Michael Myers is that he is the personification of evil, a supernatural precursor to the Terminator who is pathologically obsessed with killing his family, yes, but will also kill anyone else he comes across, no matter who they are or what they have or haven't done, merely because he wants to and because he can.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
And having now mentioned the entire premise of the Halloween franchise, the fact that Michael isn't human and is demonic or possessed, for lack of a better term, the third point that I need to raise is the inevitable question of whether the Halloween movies reinforce the stigma that people with mental illnesses are all inhuman monsters who must be locked away or even killed in order to protect society. And alas, the answer to that question is so complex and nuanced that the question itself is ultimately moot, because in direct contrast to the fact that people with mental illnesses were believed to be possessed in centuries past, the crux of the Halloween franchise is that Michael is possessed or otherwise controlled by some demonic or otherwise evil force, but is regarded as being mentally ill in a society which no longer believes in the supernatural, meaning that in the end, just as the belief that the Madonna survives while the whore is butchered is merely a manifestation of our society's ancient and obsessively misogynistic love-hate relationship with female sexuality, the stigma which people with mental illnesses still endure is a manifestation of the same ancient fear that caused our ancestors to torture and burn the mentally ill in order to drive out the demons, and that in short, therefore, any problematic elements that may exist in the Halloween movie franchise or even the entire horror movie genre in this regard are simply reflections of the deeply rooted fears in our collective unconscious which the filmmakers in question merely exploited to make horror movies. And having now hopefully addressed all of the major issues surrounding the subtext, metatext, or whatever we choose to call it regarding the Halloween franchise, please join me next time when I will review, discuss, dissect, and where appropriate, burn in effigy all 10 Halloween movies released between 1978 and 2009, including the 2 remakes, in inverted commas, written, produced, and directed by that genre-defining auteur genius, Rob Zombie.
No. Mm-mm. No. Hell no. No. I refuse. No.